Got questions about the Brazos, no more unknowns. Ever wonder where that water comes from or where it goes? We're unpacking the Brazos River.
Welcome back to Unpacking the Brazos River. Feeling a little curious today? Good, because we're taking a leisurely float down the Brazos River and picking up and sharing some intriguing and random facts along the way. Get ready to casually impress your friends with these tidbits. Or, just file them away in your brain's cool stuff I know folder. I'm Charlie Shugart, and I'm with our Public Information Office and thrilled to be joined by not one, but two people from my department. Judi Pierce and Candice Sheridan, say hello to our listeners.
Hi, great to be here.
Hi. Consider this your grand debut. Give us the lowdown. Who are you? What do you do? What's your role here at the BRA?
Well, I'm Judi Pierce. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Brazos River Authority. And our goal is basically to educate the public about everything there is to know about the Brazos River Authority and the Brazos River Basin. I've been here for about 24 years and love my job and love what we do here.
And we love that you love your job. It makes the department fun. Candice?
I'm Candice Sheridan, and I have been here 3 years now. I have a background in public education. My job here is Public Information Coordinator, which means I just get to help share more information and educate the public in different ways.
We love it. Education is such a big role in our department. We want to be able to help people understand all there is to understand about water supply, our lakes, the basin, all that is in between. So that's a big part of what the role of this podcast is. Well, I have a little story. Our department is peak nerdy fun. And this past Halloween, we collectively decided to be, wait for it, social butterflies. So picture this. All of us out in butterfly costumes. Candice is smiling. Each of us with a different social media logo on our shirt. We were truly Insta-worthy and figured it was a pretty meta way to show we love what we do.
Nice.
Love it.
Charlie with the puns. She's so punny.
I love it.
So what can you tell me about the beginning of the Brazos? Where does it start?
I have multiple answers for you.
I love this.
So the Brazos River watershed actually begins about 80 miles west of the Texas-New Mexico border, and it's going to flow all the way down to the Gulf. It's a very, very large basin, covers more than 42,000 square miles. The Brazos River itself begins where two rivers meet, and that would be the Salt Fork of the Brazos, which starts around the east of Lubbock, and then the Clear Fork of the Brazos, which begins south of Lubbock. And where those two meet in Stonewall County is where the Brazos River begins. And it's going to travel 937 miles down to Intercoastal Waterway, which is going to be about, south and west of Freeport. The old mouth of the Brazos went through Freeport and exited a little closer east, and now it's moved south.
Well, I definitely think you're going to have to back up and explain that one a little bit. What do you mean the mouth of the Brazos moved? Did it just pack up its luggage and find a new address?
Yeah.
That's actually a really interesting story, and it started before the Brazos River Authority was formed. So apparently the way the Brazos flowed into the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, now it created a lot of sandbars. So, some of the sediment moving down the river came with it, but it also had a lot of currents from the Gulf, and sandbars were causing an issue for boats being able to go up the river. So actually it would be anywhere from 4 foot to 7 feet deep, depending on where those sandbars were moving to. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in actually in the late 1800s and tried to move those sandbars around to make the mouth of the Brazos more accessible to some type of shipping that would be able to go up to the harbor. And they were unsuccessful because those sandbars moved so often. So in 1929, they actually came in and dammed up the original mouth of the Brazos and created a new mouth that went opening into the Intercoastal Waterway. The whole mouth of the Brazos moved about 2.5 miles from where it originally was to where it currently lets into the Gulf of America. So the original mouth is still there. There's a harbor available there, so you can move up the original mouth of the Brazos, but it is no longer the original mouth. It's now a secondary mouth since 1929.
I love the term mouth of the Brazos, but we really just mean this section that enters into the
Gulf, yeah.
All right. What's the story behind the name Brazos?
I like that it's a fun word.
It is a fun word, but if you speak Spanish, then you would know that the word Brazos actually means arms. So you wonder why it's called the Arms River, and it's actually not called the Arms River. The official original name was Brazos de Dios, pardon my horrible accent there, which translates into the arms of God. So we wondered, why this was originally called the Arms of God
That's
River.
so pretty.
It is, and there's several legends that talk about why it might have been named that, but probably the most likely of those is attributed to the Spanish conquistador explorer Francisco Coronado and his team as they were searching the New World for the fabled 7 cities of Cibola, and supposedly that there's 7 cities of gold out there, and they were searching for them, and they got lost, and they ended up somewhere wandering in circles in what we now know is West Texas. And of course, it was probably one of those years that it was extremely dry. There was a lot of drought, and they were running out of water and basically losing men because they were dying of thirst. Legend says that some kindly Native Americans found them and took them then to the river to be able to find some water. And as they approached and were so happy that they've made it to where they could find some drinkable water, they thanked God and said that this was literally the arms of God embracing them. So that is the legend of the arms of God, or Brazos de Dios.
That's a beautiful story.
I like it.
Candice, you mentioned earlier how long the river was. You said it was
937 miles.
I don't know if people realize the Brazos is just that big.
It's the longest within the borders of Texas.
Okay, so, if you dropped a rubber ducky at the headwaters of the Brazos, because I know everybody is wondering this, how many days would it take to reach the Gulf? Let's say there's no obstacles on the river, and you can drop the ducky and just let it float all the way.
And it passes through the 3 dams that are on the river.
Yeah.
I did ask some people who would know. Obviously, they wanted a lot more perimeters to my question, and that would be our hydrologist. So I got anywhere from 18 to 21 days.
I guess if I would have guessed, I would have thought much longer.
Right.
I guess it would depend on the flows and how
Yeah.
much rain that
Oh,
we've
yeah,
been
I got
having.
Lots of those depended on how saturated the ground was. Got a lot of technical answers, but
I love it, though. That's fun. That's just a fun visual. Thanks for that. Thanks for looking into that for me. Something I don't think a lot of people are aware of is the unique properties that make up the beginning of the Brazos River. Essentially, Brazos River begins kind of like it ends, right? A little salty?
Very salty.
Very salty.
Back during the Civil War, apparently the Union Army was running out of salt. And of course, they needed that to preserve their meats and that type of thing. So the War Department sent out a Lieutenant Colonel S.T. Sturgis, and they sent him to Texas and said, "We understand that there's some salt out in Texas, and why don't you go out there and see what you can find and bring back for us?" Sure enough, he came and he searched Texas and found a good amount of salt in East Texas, but then continued back on to the western side of Texas in the Brazos Basin, and what he found was water that was just undrinkable. And he sent a report back to the War Department saying that the water of the Brazos River was so briny that not even the mules would consume it. So
That's bad.
that's pretty bad. So we've known, ever since the Brazos has been used as water supply, we've known that it was very briny. And in Northwest Texas, it's very difficult to use it for irrigation purposes because of that. Back in the 1960s, after, the Brazos River Authority had been around for a while, we actually commissioned a study with the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of the Interior to determine what we could do to try to alleviate some of that salt. And so they really did a lot of research into why that salt was in that area of North Texas. So what they found was that there's a salt dome that was created what they believe to be 500 million years ago. And that area of the state was still underwater. It was part of the ocean. And over the millions of years, that ocean retracted and went down to more what we see as the Gulf of America. And it left behind a very large salt dome. So what happens is when the aquifer underneath that area of the state fills.
Can you explain real quick what an aquifer is for people?
Sure. An aquifer is basically an empty area underground, or an area where water can percolate through the surface that holds water underground, groundwater.
Big storage tank.
A big storage tank,
Okay,
right. As it fills, it will make that water percolate up to the surface. That would be spring water for what most people would know, running free. But in that area, because there's so much of a salt dome that had been left behind during the period that it was an ocean, it percolates that salt upward. And in the area of, say, Jayton, Texas, it actually looks like there's snow on the ground. The area where the salt dome is the largest is in Kent and Stonewall, Dickens, and King counties, kind of an area where they intersect with each other. So it's the northernmost tributaries of the Brazos that have the most salt. That would be the Salt Fork of the Brazos, which has a north and south tributary, and the Double Mountain Fork of the Brazos. It's all salty in that region. In that area of the state, we have had to do a different type of water treatment process to make that type of water drinkable. So in the rainy seasons, like we've had this springtime, the chloride content is going to be a little bit lower because it's being diluted. But during drought, that chloride becomes very concentrated when it dries out. And then when it does rain, it's an even higher concentration of chlorides that's moving downstream. So that study that they did in the 1960s had a number of recommendations on what could be done about the salinity in that part of the state. And it was everywhere from pumping out the aquifer so it just didn't rise up and make that salt dome come out, to coming in and remediating it and basically digging it all out. But all of the recommended outcomes were so expensive that what they finally came down to was just to leave it be and do more studies, that in the future there may be more amenable ways of getting rid of the salt in the water. So there was another study that was done in the early 2000s by the U.S. Economic Development Agency along with the BRA in Kent, Stonewall, and Garza counties. And unfortunately, they came up with the same results. There were no financially feasible solutions identified. So about 10 years ago, the BRA worked with an engineering firm to come up with a model to predict how high these chlorides would be at different times of the year and different stream flows. And we have this chloride model available to our customers online where they can go in at different times and predict how strong the chlorides would be for the purposes that they need them for, whether it's manufacturing or industry or cities, and how they would need to be able to clean the water according to how strong those chlorides were in the system. So that's on our website, and it's available to anybody that would like to take a look at it.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that it almost looked like it has snowed in that area because of the salt.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking like a little salt in the ground. I mean, we're talking like
basically a Texas snowstorm has come through, where there's just a good light sprinkling of snow, that one of those that only lasts a few hours during a normal snowstorm in Waco or in the central Texas area.
Okay, so when we're talking about the Brazos River, what are some of the tributaries that enter into it? For those who don't know, a tributary in its simplest term is a stream or a river that flows into a larger stream or river or into a lake.
So we have roughly 11 really good tributaries that are going to flow into the Brazos from other reservoirs, and they obviously help make up the mighty Brazos River. So we've got Salt Fork and Clear Fork. We also have North Fork of the Double Mountain and Double Mountain. So 4 up there in the upper basin, and all of those are going to feed in above Possum Kingdom Lake. As it extends, as the river extends, it's going to pick up more entryways from other tributaries. We've got the Leon River, the Lampasas River, San Gabriel River, Little River, the Navasota, which comes straight out of Limestone, and then Yewa Creek. And Yewa Creek is the southernmost tributary that's coming out of Lake Somerville.
Okay.
I had a hydrologist who had to pronounce that for me.
Oh, good.
The creek that starts with a Y. And he said, Yewa. It's like, so now I just want to say it all the time now.
No, I love it.
Okay.
I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, when we're talking about the Brazos River Basin itself, that it's not just the Brazos River, that there's so many other different waterways that are feeding
other reservoirs that then eventually feed the Brazos.
So who put in the first dam on the Brazos?
There's some history before that, before the reason that we decided to build Possum Kingdom Lake, and it's actually really interesting, cool history on how we got there. So let me talk a little bit about
Let
that.
me pause here and just
Sure.
interject that we should all know this from our Texas history class.
We all should know a little bit of our Texas history, but it certainly explains how we got to where we are right now as far as water supplies. In the 1970s, when my family first moved to Texas, all I heard was about the number of times that the city of Waco flooded before they stopped the flooding. And you kind of wonder, how in the world did they stop the flooding? It just went away one day? Well, no, it didn't actually. So Texas has always been a case for feast or famine when it came to water. And we go through these periods of drought. We go through these periods of well, drought almost always ends with a major flood, and that's just Texas. So
I know that's something that is talked about and said frequently within people who work for the BRA, but I've said it before to somebody who doesn't, and to hear droughts almost always end with a flood really is, man, a stopping point.
it's really interesting because Texas in general has only one naturally occurring lake. Now there were some small springs and pools throughout the state, but basically there are no real naturally occurring lakes in the state. The first one is said to be Caddo Lake, which is right on the edge of Texas and Louisiana border. And that one was said to have been formed by log jam. So in and itself, it was not actually a naturally occurring lake unless you consider a log jam a reason for a naturally occurring lake. So all of these rivers that Candace just mentioned all feed from north to south downstream. And when we have heavy duty rain like we've had this spring, that rain has to go somewhere. Before we had reservoirs, it would just continue to move until it got to the Gulf Coast. So throughout recorded history, we have different times when we've had major flooding that have been recorded. So there was one recorded in 1833 that caused a good number of deaths and damage. In 1842, major flood near Navasota occurred, making the Brazos leave its banks, and it widened till it was almost 6 miles wide as it traveled
Wow.
south. In 1913, there was flood that actually caused the Brazos River and the Colorado River to come together as one big waterway, flooding an estimated 3,000 square miles and causing more than 170 deaths at that time. So then again in 1921, there was another major flood, and the Texas Legislature said at that time, we've got to find something that we could do about this. So in 1923, they actually voted to commission a study, and they appropriated $600,000, which was a huge amount of money at that time, to survey all of the rivers in Texas and take a look at what might start being done to find a way to control the flooding. What happened out of that study, out of that survey, was the very first river authority in Texas, which was the Brazos River Authority, or we were actually called the Brazos River Conservation District at the time. The great thing about it was that they formed us through legislation and said, go out and see what you can do about flooding, but they unfortunately didn't provide any money to do that. Of course, the first thing that the district came up with was to build a water flood control lake. And so in surveying, throughout the basin, the best place to do that would be at the top of the basin where the flooding would begin, which would be kind of in the Mineral Wells area, so Possum Kingdom Lake area. So since we had no appropriations from the state to build this first reservoir, the people that were in charge of the BRA at the time, there was a board that was formed, actually lobbied the federal government for some funding to be able to build this first reservoir. And it took a good number of years, from 1929 to early 1934, 1935. There was a lot of lobbying going on, lots of trips back and forth to D.C. And every time they thought they had enough funding for it, something would happen and the funding would fall through. At the same time that we were looking for funding, the United States federal government was also looking at what could be done for flooding throughout the whole United States, not just Texas. And there was a law passed that ended up being the Flood Control, it was 1936, the Flood Control Act of 1936. And what that did was it gave the issue of flood control to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So while at the time the Brazos guys were looking at having Possum Kingdom Lake be a flood control reservoir, when the Corps of Engineers was given that responsibility for the entire United States, they took on the role of coming up with flood control reservoirs throughout Texas. And at that time is when Possum Kingdom Lake's purpose of flood control kind of went away. And we became more of a water supply and hydroelectric lake as a purpose for Possum Kingdom. So Possum Kingdom was then built from 1936 to 1941. It was completed in 41, and it was built by Amberson Engineering Company. So during that time, after that flood control bill passed from 1936, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started planning all of their flood control reservoirs. And the next one to be built then on the Brazos was Lake Whitney, just above Waco, which it was started in 1947 and completed in 1951. And it was that reservoir that was the reason that Waco finally had the flooding controlled, no longer had the major flooding through downtown Waco.
Interesting.
And then, of course, the third one was Lake Granbury, again, a Brazos River Authority water supply reservoir that was planned between Possum Kingdom Lake and Lake Whitney, and that was completed in 1968. And then not long after that, and most people don't know this, but as you drive through Waco, a lot of times you'll see a very full Brazos River as you pass over on I-35.
We love a full river.
And that's actually not the complete Brazos River. It's the Brazos River, as it runs through Waco, actually becomes Lake Brazos. And that was formed in 1970 with the original low water dam that was built just on the south side downstream of Lake Waco. Or excuse me, of the Brazos River through Waco, and it becomes Lake Brazos. So that was 1970. So all told, there are 3 dams on the main stem of the Brazos, which with the low water dam at Waco being the southernmost.
That's one of the differences between their reservoirs and our reservoirs, right? In that they are kind of multi-purpose reservoirs and that they have flood control and water supply, whereas the BRA's reservoirs are only water supply.
That's exactly right. They're considered multi-purpose because, say, for instance, in the case of Lake Whitney, it is flood control. It also serves the purpose of water supply in that the Brazos River Authority has a contract with the federal government to store the state of Texas's water in Lake Whitney, which is a federal reservoir. So the Corps of Engineers owns and operates Lake Whitney. However, the Brazos River Authority also pays for the maintenance of that dam in order to be able to store the state's water in a federal reservoir. So, and the other thing about Lake Whitney is it also is a hydroelectric power lake. So they are multi-purpose in that they store water for water supply, they control water from flooding, and they also generate hydroelectric power.
Wealth of knowledge right there.
That is a wealth of knowledge.
In addition to Lake Whitney, there are 7 others that are flood-controlled reservoirs throughout our basin that also store the state's water through the federal government's reservoir areas.
And the tributaries run through them.
Way to circle that back
Right?
in.
Package it up. Hey, Charlie, while we're on the topic of Waco, I think we do need to mention the suspension bridge crosses the Brazos,
Yes.
right?
Very popular destination in downtown.
Absolutely. It was built in 1870. That was the original, when it was put into use was 1870. And it was the longest bridge, suspension bridge, west of the Mississippi.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
So that's kind of a fun fact about that. It was the only crossing. So the Chisholm Trail, think about that coming down through Waco, but it was the only, safe crossing aside from the ferries that they used to use prior to that would ferry people from one side of the river to the other. And then actually south in Falls County, right around the Marlin area, there is a place called the Falls, which was another crossing that was used by Native Americans and early settlers because it had such a rocky a rocky shell that it was safe to travel across. So it had a 10-foot drop. They called it the Falls. It became Falls County. The river moved, and now the drop is only 2 feet.
Not the river being real busy moving around.
Right.
Just
Shuffling around.
Just shuffling around.
So they could cross, in the 1800s, they could cross at the falls. Or as of 1870, they could come on up to Waco and cross the bridge.
And by the way, just to add something in there, the falls on the Brazos actually moved over during one of those flood events that we talked about
Oh, that's
earlier,
right.
and
That's what caused it
that's
to move.
what caused the river to move over, was that it flooded so heavily that when it started to drain, it moved over about 2.5 miles.
So maybe this is a silly question. Do we have a lot of gators in the Brazos River?
No.
Are you sure?
I think we have one popular one in
I
Waco.
saw a log one time though.
I
and
think
it
he's
looked like a.
grown. I think theories are he may have been someone's pet when he was young and cute. If that's possible, is it possible to be young and cute as a gator?
Yes, a swamp puppy. I love all the animals.
I was talking to Judi at one point, like, have we ever had them anywhere else?
We get a lot of canoers that will call and say, "Hey, can you give us some information on, what the river stream flow is like as you go downstream?" And over the years, I've heard that there are a good number of alligators around the Hempstead area, but that was as far north as I've heard of them. I have heard people in the Bryan College Station area say that as they've canoed, or kayaked through those areas, that they have sighted them, and so I'm sure they do come north.
Right.
But you don't really find them much further north in the Bryan College Station area. So as you get down closer to the coast, of course, you're going to have alligators. But
Right.
my understanding is if you don't bother them, they don't bother you too much. Don't know. But our one friend in Waco has gotten a lot of publicity lately on the news and
Absolutely.
in the newspaper. But most often though, we don't hear too much about alligators as we do about alligator gar. And we get a lot of people sending in pictures of alligator gar, as that's
Which is exactly why I will never get into the Brazos River ever again.
No, they're incredible. They're prehistoric
They are
dinosaur-like.
dinosaur fish. They look scary.
They are scary looking fish, but they get to be really large. They're supposed to be, very much a cousin to the sturgeon, which looks similar to it, that live in different parts of our country, not in Texas, obviously. But, we often hope that if people are going to catch them, that they'll just catch them and put them back, because they are beautifully old creatures that live for many years. Take your picture and then please let that fish go back.
And send your picture to us. We love to see what you're catching on the
We do.
Brazos.
People love to see pictures of large gar.
And see why Candice is not getting in the river.
Absolutely. Couldn't blame you.
If you ask 10 different people around here what the Brazos means to them, you'll probably get 10 different answers. It's like everyone has their own personal relationship with the river. So what are some of the ways people connect to it?
I think the importance has probably changed over the years. Before there were reservoirs on the Brazos, it really was the main source of water unless you had the ability and the fortitude to dig your own well. Rivers in Texas are the lifeblood of the state, their water supply. I think most people nowadays, we have clean water coming from our water treatment plants that are built and owned usually by cities or districts within the state. So people don't think about where their water comes from. It comes from the faucet. You ask them, where's your water come from? Well, you turn the faucet on and it's there. Well, it didn't used to be that way. Back when the settlers first started coming to Texas, the rivers were the lifeblood of how they kept going. And it definitely was something to fight over. If you couldn't get close enough to the river, you really didn't have a way to water your cattle or water your crops. And without that rain, you didn't necessarily have successful crops. But I think nowadays people most associate the rivers and the reservoirs in Texas for recreation. Most people don't even really realize what the river authorities throughout the state do as far as trying to manage the water supply.
The Brazos River Authority isn't the only river authority in the state.
No, there's 18 others besides us. We are one of the largest areas, largest basins, but we are definitely not the only one. But I think most people do associate the Brazos River with recreation, and it's great fishing and it's great swimming, but mostly for us, it's water supply.
Before coming to the BRA, before working here, it's the river, across the river daily or across the lake daily. And I'm just thinking, oh, that's water. And it wasn't until coming here and realizing and understanding the power that a reservoir has as a lifeline to society, really. So without the reservoirs, people will say negative things about damming up the river and we should let the river do what the river does. But without the reservoirs, we wouldn't have water to drink.
Right. Or a reliable supply of
Right.
water, and we would still be having flooding issues,
Exactly.
so we would have,
But not just that, it's like the power of water.
Well, I mean, we just got done talking about how the river literally has moved
Right,
multiple
right.
times. So
The river does what the river
the
does.
river does what the river does.
But, just providing everything from electricity to, just a supply for humanity.
Right.
You just don't realize how powerful being able to store it and use it later until you almost don't have it. And so those tough drought years, 2011 to 2015, even in 2022, thank goodness we have reservoirs to save water to use when we don't have it.
And what will we do without our air conditioning? Because that certainly is the basis for most of our electricity in the state. I think one of the things that I wish everybody knew was where their water came from. Because in the state of Texas, there's two ways to get your water. It's groundwater or surface water. And of course, as a river authority, we work with surface water. But there's also groundwater, which is a little more difficult to get and has a whole different set of laws that apply to it in the state of Texas. So, every June, all of the water providers in the state are required to do a report to the public on where their water comes from. So each city, each subdivision or municipal district is required to tell their residents where their water comes from. So take the time to take a look at that and know, are you receiving river water or reservoir water? Or are you getting groundwater? Or is there a mix of the two? Because oftentimes there is a mix of the two. Just learn where your water comes from. It doesn't come from the faucet. It comes from something before then.
If anything Judi or Candice shared today sparked a hold up, tell me more moment, please reach out. You can email us at information@brazos.org. We've covered a lot, but if there's something else still on your Brazos wish list of things to learn, don't hold back. Tell us what you're curious about so we can dive in. Again, our email is information@brazos.org. And with that, we're out. Thanks for joining us on Unpacking the Brazos River.